So in today's lesson, we're going to cover arrays. And to explain why arrays are useful and how to use them, we're going to take like an example, imagining we're in a classroom and we need to calculate the average height of all the students inside the class. So in order to represent this, we might create different variables for every different student in the class and measure their height, right? So we'll create it like A, B, C, D. A will be one student, B will be another student. So let's say A, and this student is 150 centimeters tall. And then B, this student is 161. And then C, this student is 180. This is a tall student. And then D, this student is really short, 140. Now we want to know what the average is of all of these students. How we could do that is we could add them all together, right? So we could say let sum is equal to A plus B plus C plus D. And then we can say let average is equal to sum over 4, right? Because they're 4 data points, 4 variables we're dealing with. But what happens now if one student leaves the class? Okay, now we need to do it over 3 and we need to change this. Okay, cool. But what happens if, for example, another student joins the class, right? What happens if 10 more students join the class? We're going to have to go plus D plus E plus F plus G plus H plus I. And imagine if we had 1,000 students. Do you think you're going to sit here and go through 100 students? I'm not. So this is where arrays come into play. And arrays allow us to store a list of variables. So let's have a look at what that means. So if I created a variable called like student heights, right? So you want to always make your variables something, the name of a variable something useful. The way I create an array is with these square brackets. And if I just leave it like this, it's an empty array. So I can console.log that array, student heights. And if I run it, we're going to see just an empty array come out as the output. We're not going to see anything. We'll just see these square brackets over here. However, I can add elements here. So I can add elements to an array by just typing in here, and then I can separate different variables with a comma. So 150, 160, 170, 5, okay, that's way too tall, 540, 145, 190, etc. So I put different numbers, and then I separate each number with a comma. And now, when I run this, we will see that we get the whole list of numbers coming out. Okay, cool. So that's showing us how we can create an array. But now, like, how do we use this? It's just like we got a variable with some square brackets and commas. How do we actually like access it? So we can get particular elements from the array by indexing the array. And what we do in order to index, right, in order to say, okay, like if I wanted, for example, this number, 160, or if I wanted this number, 150, it's the first element in the array. So I can extract that by kind of indexing it. So this is the first element. So let's put console.log student heights 1. Let's see what we get out from it. And we get 160. So wait, that's weird. I'm putting 1, so I'm saying, okay, give me like the first element in this array, but I'm getting 160. So the way arrays works is that the index actually starts at 0. So if we're wanting 150, what we need to say is student heights at position 0, right? So we square, name of the array, square brackets, and then the location or the index we're looking at. And now when we run it, we can get that particular element. We'll get 150. So this is element 0, this is element 1, this is element 2, this is element 3, this is element 4. So we can get that at element 4, and we should get 190. Now, you can see how this is useful because we can now add elements into this far easier, and we can make this much bigger. But you might be asking, wait a second, we still have to go through the same, if we're wanting to calculate the average, wouldn't we have to do something like this in any case? We'd have to say let sum is equal to student heights at position 0 plus student heights at position 1 plus student heights at position 2. And like when we increase or decrease, we're going to have to do it or keep adding to this list. So yes, given the current tools we have. However, we have a solution for this, and that is using for loops. So we did for loops in a previous video. I'd suggest checking that out. And what we can do with for loops is we could actually loop over an array. So I can create a for loop, and I can say, let's start at 0, so let I is equal to 0. We're starting at 0 because the 0th element is the first element of the array, right? This is position 0 of the array. And then we can say, okay, I less than student height dot length. So every array has this dot length variable, which will tell us how long the array is. So this is now going to loop for as long as I is less than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as long as I is less than 7, this will loop. And now we can say I++, and we can now access each individual element in student height by going student height at I. I'm going to clear this, run. And now what we'll see is we're going to get each individual element coming out. 150, 160, 170, 100. See, working the way we kind of expect it to. And now you can start to see, okay, now we're able to access each individual element, and we're not necessarily needing to like add student heights of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all being handled for us within this for loop. So how then can we take us a step further and then calculate, okay, what is the average of this particular list? So if we're getting each element, what we need to do is we need to create, so we know that an average is the sum of all the elements divided by the number of elements that we have. So we know we have the number of elements, right? Students' heights.length will give us the number of elements. So we need to create something to work out, okay, what is the sum of all of these? So you might want to make a variable and say, okay, let sum is equal to some value, or sum is equal to 0. We can maybe start it there. And then we can say sum is equal to student heights at position I. Or rather, we want to say, because we want to say 150 plus 160 plus 170 plus 145, etc. So it's sum is equal to sum plus, right? Because if I'm starting at 0, then I'll go 0 plus 150. Then I'll say 150 plus 60. And then 150, let's bring it up, 150 plus 160, I'll get 310. And then I'll say 310 plus 170. And then I'll get 490. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the algorithm that we're then following. So we can say sum is equal to sum plus student's height. And then at the end, over here, we can maybe try and get console.log sum. And when we run it, let's see what happens. And we get an error. Sum is not defined. So this is actually a mistake I see a lot of students make, the way that it's currently set up. In that the variable, right, so local and global scope applies to any time there are these brackets. So sum is created within the local scope of this for loop, and then we're accessing it outside of it. Watch the video on local and global scope if you're not following along. So in order to access this variable, we actually need to define it in the global scope, or not necessarily global scope, but we need to define it within the same scope that we access it over here. The other problem with doing this, right, the way it was set up just now, is that every time we rerun this, every time we get back to this line of code, it's going to be reset. So sum is never going to kind of calculate the sum of all of these. It's only going to contain what is the next number. It's always going to be 0 plus this next number. Because every time it gets back here, it's always going to be reset to 0. We want to keep it as consistently kind of adding on each value. So we define it outside of the for loop. And now over here, we can get console.log. We can get the sum. And if I hit run now, maybe we hit clear, hit run again, hit a load. And over here, we can see this number over here. This is now giving us the sum because we're still console.logging each individual element. So 1,120 is the sum of all of these elements. And then if we simply want the average, we simply need to divide it by student height.length. And if we hit run with that, we get the average of 160. And now you can see how we can easily add as many elements as we want into this. So this list can grow to 1,000,000 elements, and this code will still work. So I'm going to just keep going here. Interesting math question. Will we still get the same sum or the same average if I'm keeping on repeating this? Tell me what you think. Pause the video and maybe post it in the comments below if you think we're still going to get the same average for this new array that I've just copy pasted 100 times. Let's see. Let's clear and let's run. And we do. We get the exact same average. Because it's the same numbers just repeated multiple times. You can maybe have a look at the math later down. But I'm going to end this video here and maybe do another one on arrays later. But this is a good basic introduction to JavaScript arrays.